Hello, welcome to the YouTube channel of Christ United Methodist Church, located in the Owen Brown Interfaith Center here in Columbia, Maryland. My name is Reverend Angela Wells. My pronouns are she and her, and it's my absolute joy to serve as the pastor here at Christ UMC. Whoever you are and whatever your story, we are so grateful that you have found your way here to our YouTube channel today, and we look forward to connecting with you further. Christ UMC is a reconciling congregation, which means that we as a church have committed to the full inclusion of LGBTQ+ persons in the life and ministry of the church. We have also pledged to become an anti-racist church. Both of these commitments are a part of our identity as followers of Jesus Christ, striving to love God and neighbor in all we do. At CUMC, we celebrate Christian love that encompasses absolutely all people.
Our scripture reading this morning is taken from the 16th chapter of Matthew, verses 21 to 20.
To set the stage, Jesus has just asked Peter, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter responds, "The Messiah." It's immediately after that this passage picks up and Matthew tells the story. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed on the third day be raised. And Jesus took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "God forbid it. Lord, this must never happen to you." But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Then Jesus told the disciples, "If any wish to come after me, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life?"
Years ago, a dear friend of mine, who is also a pastor, shared with me an unfortunate, even if humorous, story. One day, as she was driving, she got cut off by a rude driver who not only cut her off, but also flipped her off in the process. Now, perhaps this doesn't sound like a story worth sharing, fairly run-of-the-mill for the Baltimore, D.C. metro area. But the thing that made this incident stand out is that as the car sped off, my pastor friend caught a glimpse of a bumper sticker. It was a familiar bumper sticker, very familiar. It was the bumper sticker for the very church she pastors, complete with the church logo and the name of the church. Oops. Now, something tells me that that person did not set out that day to flip off their pastor, any more than Peter set out that day to rebuke the very Jesus he just named as Messiah. Well, there you have it. It would be easy enough to shake our heads in self-righteous dismay at the hypocrisy displayed. How dare that driver? How dare Peter? They should have known better. But maybe we'd be better served to look ourselves a little closer in the mirror, lest we too hear Jesus' stinging words to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." Yikes. This is a powerful passage that digs deep into our human psyche and our Christian theology. Peter's hypocrisy goes even deeper than our church bumper sticker road rage incident. For it's not simply a matter of matching word and deed, but a denial of what it even means to say the most basic sentence of our faith: Jesus is the Messiah. Peter has checked off the box for following Jesus 101. He's got the basics down. Jesus, you are the Messiah, he declared just a few verses before our passage picks up today. But following Jesus 201, what does it actually mean that Jesus is the Messiah? This is where Peter seems to flunk out. You see, Peter was a product of his own socio-historical and religio-cultural context. Like Jesus, he was a first-century Jew. His entire life, he had been steeped in the Jewish tradition of waiting for the Messiah, the anointed one, the one who would save Israel. But you see, Peter, like his counterparts, had a very clear idea of what this Messiah would look like. Or maybe it was more like he had an idea of what this Messiah should look like. The Messiah would, or should, overthrow the oppressive rule of the Roman Empire. The Messiah would, or should, be a leader, king, a military ruler, a prophetic leader like Moses, somebody who would have the power to make things right again. Because things had not been right for a very, very long time. Israel was conquered by Assyria in 722 BCE. Judah was conquered by Babylon in 587 BCE. Then the Persians took control, then the Roman Empire. It had been a long time since Israel had had any power for self-governance whatsoever. But the Messiah would change that. That was the hope. That was the dream. That was the expectation. And at this particularly ripe moment in history, in walks Jesus. After teaching the crowds, calling the disciples, healing the sick, performing miracles, Peter has an aha moment. This is it. This is who we've been waiting for. This is the Messiah, the anointed one, the one who's going to make it all better. But no sooner does Peter have this aha moment than Jesus goes off script. I must go to Jerusalem, suffer at the hands of those in power, and be killed, and be raised on the third day. But Peter seems to miss that part. Enter Peter's knee-jerk reaction. No way, God forbid. It'd be pretty easy to knock Peter for this response. What audacity to contradict Jesus. He basically says, you may be the Messiah, but clearly you misunderstand the job description. How dare Peter be so sure he knows better than Jesus what this Messiah thing is all about? But if we're truly honest here, we might have more in common with Peter than we'd prefer to admit. The late Dr. Dale Andrews, who taught at my alma mater of Vanderbilt Divinity School, reflected on this passage, writing, "We too are often confusingly confident with our claims upon God, and more so in our claims on God's behalf." End quote. Like Peter, we too often think we know what's best. Christians have spent 2,000 years trying to tell God who God should be, what God should do, and who God should judge. Peter desperately wants a Messiah, but not this kind of Messiah, not one who suffers, not one who dies, not one who operates on the margins of society, not one who has no political power or military might. To be the Messiah, it turns out, does not mean that you swoop in on winged chariot to rescue the people from the suffering of this world. To be the Messiah, Jesus reveals, means taking on, standing with, and embodying that very suffering. Peter doesn't like this idea of a Messiah, and truth be told, neither do we. Because following a suffering Savior doesn't bode well for our comfort either. Because Jesus kept talking, remember? If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. This way of Jesus doesn't just cost Jesus his life, it costs those who follow him as well. No thanks, Peter says. And not just Peter. Dr. Richard Ward writes, saying no to the way of Jesus will become a habit for the church. So what exactly is this way of Jesus that Peter and the church and us have a bad habit of saying no to? Jesus describes the cost of following him, the cost of discipleship in this passage. And it all comes down to cross-bearing, to suffering, to losing one's life. Too often, Christians like to think of the cross as purely something Jesus bore for us. But here Jesus is saying that the cross is something we are still called to bear for him. We've got skin in the game. But here's where it becomes really important to be clear about what we mean and what we don't mean by this cross-bearing way of life. Jesus is not glorifying suffering here. The church has spent too many centuries glorifying suffering, usually reinforcing the suffering of the powerless and letting the powerful off scot-free. But that's quite contrary to what Jesus is actually saying. Those who want to save their life will lose it. Those who focus on saving their own skin, no matter the effect on others, those are the ones who have missed the boat entirely. Jesus died on a cross, not because some angry God required blood to be spilled, but because the God we meet in Jesus Christ chose to become love made flesh, and humans in all our collective dysfunction couldn't handle it. The powers that be were threatened because love does not abide by the rules of power and greed and oppression that keep them in power. Because love is the ultimate subversive power that tells people they are enough and worthy and empowered to stand up for their self-worth. The powers that be were threatened, and so they stamped out that threat to their power, Jesus. It was inevitable, not because God wanted it that way, but because that's how the powers of this world operate. And God refused to sink to their level, refused to give up on love, no matter the cost. And so the way of Jesus involves risk. It involves taking a stand on behalf of love. It involves a cross. Peter tries to take Jesus without his cross. We too often try to take Jesus without his cross. We want to follow Jesus's ethical teachings as if they could be separated from the cross. But here's the thing, Jesus's ethical teachings are not some abstract ivory tower philosophical musings. Jesus's ethical teachings are fundamentally embodied. They're concrete. They require not just mental agreement, but tangible, lived out commitment. Jesus didn't act on behalf of the poor, he was poor. He didn't just dream of a new way to be in community. He set about founding a movement of people committed to living their lives, not by the standards of empire, but by the standards of love and justice and peace. Jesus didn't just advocate from the sidelines on behalf of those who were oppressed. He aligned himself with the oppressed and against the oppressors in such a way that it had him killed. Peter tries to take Jesus without his cross. Peter isn't having it. God forbid, Lord, this must never happen to you. Enter Jesus's famous clapback. Get behind me, Satan. First, yes, this phrase has been turned into a joke, a meme, a gif. Something we don't like comes along. Get behind me, Satan. Let me tell you, this week I had half a mind to tell the ragweed giving me terrible allergies, get behind me, Satan. To me, the problem comes in not when we're lightheartedly joking, but when people start to legit think this is our response to any old thing we don't like. This phrase, get behind me, Satan, has been used in fundamentalist circles to target behaviors and entire people groups who don't jive with their political agendas. Anything that they deem a temptation is branded Satan. Everything from secular music to the way people dress, or let's be honest, the way women dress, to LGBTQ plus persons. All are warded off like a xenophobic magic trick. Get behind me, Satan. Not only is this harmful, not only is it bad theology, it's also irresponsible biblical interpretation. It's taking this quote, "Get behind me, Satan," completely out of its narrative context and using it willy-nilly to condemn anything outside of one's disturbingly small comfort zone. It reminds me of the famous quote by author Anne Lamott. "You can safely assume you've created God in your own image when it turns out that God hates all the same people you do." End quote. But here's the thing. Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan," in a very particular context. First off, Satan, forget pointy ears and a tail. Satan just means adversary. So Jesus is calling Peter, who's supposed to be Team Jesus all the way, an adversary. Second off, get behind me, aka follow me. Peter jumped ahead of Jesus to try to tell Jesus where to go instead of answering the invitation to follow him. And third, we must ask, what did Peter do to warrant such a stark critique? He tried to tell Jesus how to Jesus. He tried to tell God how to God. He assumed he knew best and tried to confine Jesus to a preordained box, his own. This is the Messiah we need, Jesus. Get with the program. Jesus' stark critique is not about morals. It's certainly not about music or clothes or sexuality. Jesus' stark critique is of Peter's attempt to limit or control God, to make God abide by his own human standards of success and power, to clean up the gospel, none of this messy, risky, cross-bearing stuff. Jesus' stark critique of the church today is our attempt to limit or control God, to assume God hates the people we hate, to confuse blessings for material prosperity, to clean up the gospel, none of this aligning ourselves with the poor and oppressed, risky, cross-bearing stuff. As much as Peter may want it to be, as much as we may want it to be, ours is not a Hallmark faith. It's not a happily ever after situation. Bad stuff happens. Run from any preacher who tries to tell you that you just need to believe or do X, Y, Z, and then it will be all magically fixed. Good people suffer. Run from any preacher who tries to equate faithfulness with material prosperity. Jesus' call involves risk, commitment, tangible action. Run from any preacher who tries to tell you that following Jesus is just a spiritual, heart and soul matter only. Instead of acknowledging that we serve a God who puts skin in the game and who invites us to do the same. To align ourselves with the suffering, with the oppressed, with the marginalized, to choose the thriving of all, even when it means giving up some of the privilege and power that has been dealt to us in this world. To comfort the grieving, not with harmful cliches and easy answers that might make us feel better, but by steadfast presence with them in their pain. To take up a cross rather than give up on Jesus' kingdom vision of justice, love, and peace. To share the good news that our God does not fit in a box. God's imagination shatters our limited human expectations, all those shoulds and coulds that we try to impose. God's grace is bigger than we give God credit for. God's mercy does not abide by the power games of this world. God's love does not stop short of even death itself. To say yes to this God, not in the abstract, but to this particular God as made manifest in Jesus. Not the Messiah we asked for, but the Messiah we need. May we say yes. May we follow faithfully. Amen.
Thank you so much for tuning in. If you are new to CUMC, whether you are local or tuning in from far away, we would love to connect with you. Please feel free to visit our website at www.cumc.org. obic.org. Visit us on Facebook or connect with me, Reverend Angela, directly at angelawells153@gmail.com. As you move into whatever is next in your day, I invite you to receive this blessing. Beloved, you are made in God's own image. You are enough. You are not alone. Go forth with the blessing of God, the Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer, to share the light and love of Christ in your community and far beyond.